feels like a quiet breeze on a rainy day, soft, healing, and unforgettable. It's about a woman who was once called cursed and a man who lost everything except his integrity. Together, they found not just love, but a new beginning. So grab a cup of tea, wrap yourself in something cozy, and let's begin. Clara Whitmore lived in a small wooden cottage perched on a hill overlooking the bay in Maine, where salt air seeped through the shutters and rumors traveled faster than the waves. 5 years had passed since that fateful day, the day she waited in a white wedding dress and her fiancé never arrived. A car accident on the way to their ceremony had taken his life and her reputation. Since then, Clara had become a whispered name, averted glances at the village market, and a silent shadow on storm-slicked streets. She's cursed, they said. People around her suffer. The town that once felt like home had become an invisible prison. She survived by making pottery. Clay, at least, didn't fear her touch. Her hands, stained with earth, shaped broken masses into beauty, the way she tried to reassemble the shattered pieces of her own heart. And then Ethan Callahan arrived. A renowned architect, fleeing tabloid headlines and paparazzi flashes after a humiliating divorce, he returned to the village where his grandmother once lived to find peace, to recover, to disappear. But what he didn't expect was for that quiet seaside village to rewrite the course of his life, because of a woman named Clara Whitmore. The Lighthouse Diner sat at the edge of the bay, its golden light casting warmth over steaming coffee mugs and the scent of fresh apple pie drifting from the kitchen. Clara sat in the corner booth, fingers wrapped gently around a cup of peppermint tea, eyes drifting toward the window where ocean winds kissed the foggy glass. Emmy, her only remaining friend, had insisted she leave her pottery studio and come to dinner. "He's not from this town," Emmy had whispered, "so he won't know the rumors." Ethan Callahan walked in just as Clara was about to stand and bolt. Tall, understated, with slightly tousled sandy blonde hair and eyes that were direct but carried the weight of storms weathered. They shook hands, a polite gesture, but the touch sparked something oddly familiar. Dinner began with talk of weather and work, but quickly slipped into something deeper. Clara asked if he believed in curses. Ethan took a thoughtful sip of red wine before answering, "I believe people can be cruel, and sometimes they call it a curse so they don't have to face the truth." For the first time in years, Clara laughed, not out of politeness, but because in this man's eyes, she wasn't a walking tragedy or a ghost of whispered shame. She was someone whose pain deserved to be seen. They left the diner under a darkening sky. No promises were exchanged, no dramatic declarations. But when their eyes met just before parting, they both knew. This wasn't just an ordinary dinner. The storm rolled in faster than the forecast predicted. Wind howled through narrow alleys. Waves crashed against the cliffs with a fury that threatened to swallow the coastal town whole. Ethan offered to drive Clara home, but when they neared her pottery studio, fallen pine branches blocked the road completely. "My cabin's close," Ethan said. "It's safer there." Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. His cabin, nestled among towering evergreens and facing the sea, radiated quiet warmth. Inside, the fire's soft glow flickered against rustic wooden walls. Clara had never stepped into a space that felt so calm, so untouched by judgment. They drank tea and talked over the rhythm of rain against the windows. Clara spoke of the wedding that never was, of the whispers she could never silence. Ethan spoke of his ex-wife, the one who had said he was less than a man because he couldn't give her what she truly wanted, a family. The hurt in his voice mirrored the ache in her heart. In the quiet that followed, they found comfort in each other's arms, not rushed, not desperate. And that night, as Clara fell asleep on the couch near the fire, Ethan sat across from her, watching her peaceful face. Perhaps for the first time, feeling truly seen. He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage ring, his grandmother's wedding band, an heirloom he had never planned to use. "She told me, when I found the one who truly saw me, I would just know," he whispered. Gently, he lifted Clara's hand and hesitated. The fire crackled softly, echoing the rhythm of his breath. Then, slowly, he slid the ring onto her left finger. In her sleep, she smiled faintly, as if her heart had heard what her ears could not, that this was not just gold and diamonds, but a beginning. The next morning, Clara woke to soft sunlight streaming through the cabin window. She felt dazed by the unfamiliar peace, until her gaze fell to her left hand, where a vintage ring glinted in the light. She blinked, thinking she might still be dreaming. Ethan stood by the stove pouring coffee. "It was my grandmother's," he said, noticing her staring at the ring. "I'm not asking for anything, but last night, I just knew." Clara didn't know what to say. Her heart pounded with a rhythm both terrified and moved. But peace, she learned, was fleeting. The rumors spread like wildfire. Someone had taken a photo of them at the diner. Someone else had seen Clara's car parked overnight at the cabin. On the local town forum, her name once again became a target, this time accused of seducing a stranger into misfortune. Worse, a gossip site picked up the story and spun it into cruel headlines. Fallen architect hiding with town's tragic witch. Ethan Callahan, renowned architect, recently divorced, was reportedly hiding out in town with the so-called cursed widow. His former firm, fearing public backlash, reached out to suggest that he create some distance if he ever hoped to be considered for reinstatement. Clara, devastated, told him they should end things. "I won't be the reason your career crumbles," she whispered. But Ethan only looked at her, steady and sure. "Clara, I built my career on integrity. I can't abandon the one person who truly sees me just because others refuse to." The next day, he submitted his resignation. Clara wept, not because he refused to leave, but because he chose her with no conditions attached. And when Ethan took her hand and walked down Main Street, where judgment still hung in every glance, Clara realized she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't fear the whispers. Because beside her stood a man who didn't just see her, but was willing to lose the world to keep her. They thought the worst was behind them, until Clara returned home and found her cottage door kicked in, furniture overturned, her pottery shattered on the floor like the broken remnants of a past crushed underfoot. She didn't need anyone to tell her this wasn't a robbery, it was a message. The police shrugged. "No evidence," they said. Neighbors averted their eyes. Boys who once whispered about her being cursed had now painted the word witch in red across her door. Clara stood in the wreckage, hands trembling not from cold, but from the quiet rage of someone who had done everything right, lived quietly, kindly, and still. Hatred found her. Ethan arrived as soon as he heard. He didn't say much, just held her close, then rolled up his sleeves and began cleaning up the shards. "You're not spending another night here," he said. They moved back to his cabin, the only place where Claire had ever slept without fear. A few days later, an elderly woman knocked at the door. Mildred, once a nurse at the clinic where Clara's fiancé had been treated, held a weathered file in her shaky hands. "I've kept this too long," she said. Inside were medical documents, diagnoses, warnings, signatures. Her fiancé had been born with a severe heart condition, the kind doctors explicitly warned could be fatal under stress or travel. His family knew, he knew, and he'd been advised never to drive long distances, especially in bad weather. That day, eager to retrieve the wedding handkerchief for Clara, he ignored every warning. Clara stared at his familiar signature on the medical release. Her tears fell, not out of grief, but out of the relief that comes with freedom. "I've lived like a criminal," she whispered, "when the truth is, I never did anything wrong." Ethan took her hand, eyes never leaving her unraveling expression. "Now you know," he said gently. "You don't have to apologize for pain you didn't cause." In that moment, the ashes around her began to fade, and something new, fragile but fierce, started to bloom where a wound had once been. Life in the forest cabin had begun to take shape, not perfect, not entirely peaceful, but filled with the quiet essentials that allow healing to take root. Time, stillness, and someone who chooses to stay when the world demands otherwise. Clara had returned to her pottery wheel. At first, her hands trembled, hesitant, as if afraid even the clay might abandon her. But over time, shapeless mounds began to turn into bowls, vases, hope in ceramic form. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't ask her how she felt or when she'd start again. He simply gave her space and stayed close enough for her to feel safe. Ethan spent most of his time in the small studio behind the cabin. He wasn't just rebuilding a career, he was rebuilding himself. His new sketches no longer looked like steel and cold geometry. They had curves now, softness, like the world had taught his hands to listen, not just measure. One early June afternoon, Ethan asked Clara to go for a drive. They followed a winding dirt road through groves of whispering pines and fields of lavender in full bloom. The destination was a quiet hilltop, kissed by ocean breeze and sunlight. The sky stretched wide and endless above them. "I bought this land," Ethan said. "I want to build a home here, not just for me, for us." Clara said nothing at first, her eyes tracing the horizon. She had never dared to imagine the word us, but now it didn't scare her anymore. From his jacket pocket, Ethan pulled a small velvet box, but it was different from the one she'd seen before. "The first ring belonged to my grandmother," he said softly. "It was part of my past, the thing that helped me remember what love can be. But this one," he opened the box. A platinum band, simple and elegant, holding a single teardrop-shaped gem, a pale blue that mirrored the color of Clara's eyes when caught in the light. "I designed this myself," Ethan said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not as an architect, but as a man who finally knows what it means to come home. Because home is you." Clara lifted her hand to her lips, frozen in place. "You don't have to answer now," Ethan continued. "Just know this. This isn't about fixing the past or saving either of us. It's about the present and the future I want to create with you." The breeze stirred gently, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Clara stepped toward him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her smile radiant. "You're right," she whispered. "The old ring was where we began, but this is where we choose to continue." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, this time not while she slept, not in silence, but with full clarity, under open sky, with the strength of a heart that had decided. They didn't promise each other a life free from pain or setbacks, but now, every scar they carried held worth because they had brought them here, to this moment, where neither of them had to run from love anymore. That summer passed like a soft, waking dream. Long days, cool nights, and everything from the sunlight spilling through the cabin windows each morning to the rhythm of Clara's pottery wheel carried the breath of something new, rebirth. News of Clara's cottage being vandalized had spread further than expected, and surprisingly, not everyone stayed silent this time. Some townspeople began to speak out against the injustice. The bakery owner returned a teacup she had once refused to sell Clara, murmuring, "I'm sorry I believed what people said." A boy who once painted witch on her door left a bundle of lavender and a note, "You're a good person." Clara didn't believe in magic, but she did believe in small changes, when people chose to look at one another with less judgment and more heart. Ethan had returned to architecture with a new team of young designers. Together, they began redesigning public spaces in the town, a new library, a children's park, and an open-air art gallery. In every plan, Ethan left a small space, unmeasurable by ruler or code, reserved for things that couldn't be drawn: compassion, community, and a place where someone like Clara could simply be seen. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara opened her first pottery exhibition since the attack. Her new pieces bore cracks, but instead of hiding them, she traced them with gold glaze, inspired by the Japanese art of kintsugi. Each item had a name: trust, silence, choice, to be seen. The last person to walk in that day was Ethan. He took her hand, looked her square in the eyes. "If you hadn't been at that diner, if you hadn't come with me during the storm, maybe I'd still be a successful man, but empty, and maybe you'd still be a survivor, but never truly alive." Clara smiled, fingers tightening around his. "If there's one thing I believe now," she whispered, "it's this. The curse was never real. We just hadn't been loved the right way. On her finger, the ring Ethan had designed caught the last light of evening, not as the end of a fairy tale, but as proof of a simple truth. Sometimes what the world calls a curse is just a blessing in disguise, waiting for someone brave enough to see it. They were married on an autumn afternoon, not grand, not extravagant, just a few dozen loved ones beneath a trellis of orange and gold vines on the hillside where Ethan had once proposed. Clara wore a simple white dress, lavender tucked into her hair, and Ethan wore a linen shirt and couldn't stop smiling. Amy stood beside Clara as her only bridesmaid. James, now Ethan's close friend, officiated. The old town pastor, who once avoided eye contact with Clara, stood proudly and declared, "I was wrong, and today I'm honored to bless this union." In their vows, Ethan said, "I won't promise to always be right, but I promise to always listen and to love you, even when it's not easy." Clara whispered, "I once believed I'd never love again, but you taught me love isn't magic. It's a choice, made every day." Their first kiss as husband and wife happened beneath the amber sun, met with applause and misty eyes from every guest. 2 years later, on a chilly early winter morning, Clara lay in a hospital bed, her hand gripping Ethan's. "You thought I wouldn't scream," she joked, sweat dampening her brow. Ethan whispered, "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Then came the cry, the sound they'd waited 9 long months to hear. A baby girl, pink and tiny, yet mighty. Ethan held her first, tears filling his eyes, then placed her gently into Clara's arms. "She's proof," he said softly, "that the most beautiful things can come, even after everything's been broken." Clara looked at the child, a soul untouched by gossip, sorrow, or judgment, just life, new and pure. The baby opened her eyes and gripped her mother's finger like she had always belonged. On Clara's left hand, beneath the soft hospital light, 2 rings gleamed, the wedding band Ethan had designed just for her, and beside it, his grandmother's vintage ring. Clara had chosen to wear it again that day, not as a symbol of mourning, but of gratitude for everything that had led them here. And so, after years of being labeled the cursed widow, Clara was now a wife, a mother, a woman who didn't just survive, but lived, wholly, freely, and loved as she had always deserved.